Hello there, very good evening and welcome to Government in Transition. I'm your host, Eddie Lane. This evening I'm joined by Prime Minister-elect Brigadier Mark Phillips, Priya Manickchand, a former minister under the People's Progressive Party Civic and of course the candidate in the 2020 elections, and Attorney at Law Sanjeev Datadin, and he's also a candidate of the People's Progressive Party Civic. Ladies, gentlemen, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Ed. And I'm honored to be on the program with Priya and Sanjeev this evening for this important communication for viewers on what transpired today.
Thanks, Ed.
Yeah, good night, Eddie, and to the PM-elect and Sanjeev, and to all our listeners and watchers. I know people are very curious about what happened today and what's the way forward, and we're very happy to be able to sit here tonight and go through for as long as it takes what happened today and what would be the way forward.
Good evening, Eddie. Good evening, Priya. Good evening, Brigadier. Good evening to your listeners and your viewers, and thanks for having me.
All right, so today has been the ruling of the CCJ today has been a historic one, one that clarify some very critical issues as we move forward to the conclusion of the March 2nd general and regional elections. What I'll do first and foremost is to give each one of you an opportunity for some general opening comments about the ruling before we get into the specifics with regards to what the court exactly ruled and the way forward. It's going to start. The lady before the gents?
A lady first.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks again, Eddie, for having us. What happened here today is what we expected. And by what we expected, I mean very simply, we expected the Caribbean Court of Justice, or Apex Court, to do right by the people of Guyana and to uphold the rule of law and the universally accepted principles of democracy. Eddie, today Guyana was watching the CCJ at 3 o'clock, but you'd be surprised at how many people across the world, not only in the Guyanese and the diaspora, but people across the world who are interested in law, who are interested in democracy, who are interested in rights and human beings having certain inherent rights, such as to choose a government without interference, that were watching this decision. And so we're very glad. In short, we won. In short, the PPPC won in the Caribbean Court of Justice today. We will go through all the points that we won. But in any court matter, there's a winner and there's a loser. And in today's matter, the People's Progressive Party, the new parties, the small parties, the people who challenged the APNU AFC and Miss Eslyn David, and particularly Mr. Lowenfield, the CEO, using or misusing certain statements made by the Court of Appeal. The people who challenged that won, and the PPP challenged that. It was a PPP application to the Caribbean Court of Justice, and the PPP won that matter today in every single area, but we'll discuss that in a little bit.
Okay. Well, in addition to what Priya just mentioned, Ed, I wish to submit that all of us in Guyana, all of us, whether we are from the opposition or from the government side, all were represented by attorneys at law before the Caribbean Court of Justice. And as a people who believe in upholding the rule of law, we have all won today, in the sense that the CCJ has delivered its ruling, and all of us will abide by that ruling. The people of Guyana has won, and I hope and I plead with the people of Guyana to continue to be peaceful, to continue to operate lawfully as we await the next step. And the next step, you know, is for GECOM to declare the results of the elections.
Sanjeev.
Ed, the position is, as I've said to you before, civilized societies have ways of resolving disputes. And this is the way you resolve it. You go to a court, you present your arguments. As Brigadier said, that every political party in Guyana was represented at these proceedings, and everyone had a say. What it was, and the reason why it was necessary for the PPP to file this appeal was because what happened is the Court of Appeal made certain orders, which were really the mischief being created by the orders was how the orders were being used and for what purpose did the chief elections officer rely on those orders. He relied on those orders effectively to remove 115,000 odd votes from the list in his declaration. So there were, what it was a good thing. It was a landmark decision from the court in that the court considered important constitutional issues and electoral law. This is the first case on substantive electoral law to reach this court, and the court was emphatic in its ruling. The court was very detailed in its ruling, and the court actually set out in great detail in a step-by-step process what should happen, what are the responsibilities of GECOM, what are the responsibilities of the chief elections officer, reminded them that they are public officers that have to perform statutory duties, and encouraged that they do so. The ruling essentially was focused, as we all know, it was focused on whether there was an interpretation of the Constitution that meant by the Court of Appeal, which meant that you couldn't go to the court of, the Caribbean Court of Justice. The court dealt with those issues in great detail, made clear that it's been too long and there have been too many missteps, if you want to use, that's my word, missteps, in the process to cause delays. And the court hoped that what would happen now is there would be a speedy conclusion to the electoral process and there would be a declaration. The court was at pains to point out that all of the letters that Mr. Harmon wrote as an agent and as a candidate for APNU about all the various complaints, he made the court
Sanjeev, we're going to get into those details as we go along. But I want to start from the perspective of maybe giving some background to how we get here, because I think it's important. And you mentioned just now issues of where Lowenfield, for example, when he prepared that report, the last report he prepared, where he said he relied on the Court of Appeals ruling, and to prepare that report. Like you rightly said, the court would have given some specific directions to the Guyana Elections Commission in the process of throwing out, if you want to call it that, the first and foremost, prove that the Court of Appeal don't have jurisdiction to hear the matter. And maybe we should go in some detail, because we've been saying a lot of these things earlier. We talked about why the Court of Appeal had no jurisdiction. And you had some people trying to provide counter arguments, and clearly they were deliberately misreading the constitutional provisions and so forth. But maybe how we get here, if we can start from there, maybe I start with you, Priya, as to how we get here.
Right, let's not dress it up, Eddie. What happened is the people of Guyana went to, from January, well, before January, but particularly from January of this year, we started hearing from all the political parties about what their plans and programs would be for the people of this country, for women, for children, for farmers, for miners, for the cane cutters, for school education, for health. And people made their decision, they informed themselves, and they went to the polls on March 2nd and they voted. And that vote count, everything went well. all the international bodies, all the local bodies, all the political parties, including Mr. Granger, and Justice Claudette Singh. Everybody said election day went very, very well. It was very smooth. Um, Everything was done perfectly. Election count started happening. Regions, 9 of the 10 regions had already been counted. The PPP was in the lead by a very, very large margin. And then Region 4 started getting trouble. And the trouble Region 4 started getting really came about because the PNC, AP, and UAFC realized they were about to lose the election. And so they got a man named Claremont Mingo to attempt to rig the election by giving the PNC, AP, and UAFC votes that the people of Guyana did not give them. We made objections about that. The international community made objections about that. The people of Guyana made objections about that. And to shorten the whole story, Mr. Granger invited the Caribbean community after 5 heads of government had come here to observe a recount, a national recount. Although there were no problems in 9 of the 10 regions, the PPP said we have nothing to lose. Let's recount the entire country. That recount happened, and the PNC, AP, and UAFC said they would win the recount because they got more votes than the PPPC. So it's always been that they got more votes. Once those boxes started opening and there were no, it was very visible that there were no more votes for the AP and UAFC, then we started hearing all kinds of Nancy stories, who dead and vote, who migrate and vote, and so on. And people who were accused of being dead turned up to say, we're not dead, we're right here, we voted. People who were accused of being out of the country turned up, not only physically, but by way of sworn affidavit saying, we're right here, we never went away, we voted. And then, so the election, the count was finished. That count happened on the World Wide Web. Today, Justice Saunders, who read a judgment for the whole court, was a unanimous judgment. He was very clear and he detailed very nicely how very transparent that recount happened. It happened with cameras present. It happened with all the political parties present. It happened on the World Wide Web. And then there was a recount and 10 regions were certified. As the regions were completed, they were certified, and they were certified with valid votes. So what we knew at the end of this process was that 460,000 persons cast valid votes. 233,000 of those went to the People's Progressive Party. 217,000 of those went to the AP and UAFC, and just under 10,000 went to a collaboration of new parties. Because that would mean that the AP and UAFC lost, they started doing a whole set of fancy footwork. Look, that's just some nice words for me to say. They tried to rig the elections. They started trying to thief the elections. They started trying to come up with new narratives and new stories. And they got someone named Eslyn David to go to the High Court with one of their lawyers, not to the High Court, sorry, to the Court of Appeal, because in my view, respectfully, they were trying to dodge the diligence of the High Court. So they went to the Court of Appeal and got the Court of Appeal to say that more votes cast mean more valid votes cast. And by so doing, invited Mr. Well, I don't know if Mr. Lowenfield invited himself to say that when they say more valid votes cast, he by himself could sit in a seat by himself and throw away 285,000 votes. And then when there was a hue and cry about him throwing away 285,000 votes, he came back again and said, okay, I'm not going to do 285,000 anymore. It's 115,000. So the Guyana Elections Commission, through its chairperson, Justice Claudette Singh, said to Mr. Lowenfield, we do not have the ability nor the jurisdiction to determine what votes are valid and what votes are not valid. So you're going to go and count or go and prepare a report based on those valid votes that were counted for the whole world to see over the last 35 days and come back to me with a report. Mr. Lowenfield came back with a report that sought to invalidate 115,000 of those votes. He based his decision so to do on some obscure reasoning he took from something the Court of Appeal said, and said he had jurisdiction to do that. So we could move on from there. Essentially, where we are right now is that there is a report from, there is an instruction from Justice Claudette Singh and the Guyana Election Commission that a report should be prepared about that contains the valid votes, and that should be prepared by Mr. Lowenfield. And there's a decision by the Caribbean Court of Justice, which we will discuss further, about what that means and what must be used in that report. So that's where we are today. We're really at the place where we began. It is back in the hands of GECOM. Mr. Granger said it today. All of this goes back to the chairperson and the commissioners of GECOM, and we agree with him for them to make a decision. And the decision is very clear about what they have to do, for them to declare a winner and swear a president in and bring an end to the 2020 elections.
All right, I'm going to bring in you here, Brigadier, before I come to you, Sanjeev, because after this, I want us to go and maybe examine the decisions today, item by item, and maybe provide some clarity in terms of explanation to the public so they understand what the arguments were from our side and what the court ruled. So, Brigadier, I'm going to give you a chance to come in here. Your thoughts on what is going on so far?
Well, you know, Ed, I listened to the ruling today, and while I will depend on Priya and Sanjeev to deal with the technical aspects and explain to the people or viewers, I wish to say that we were reminded of a number of things today. One of the things that we were reminded of is that we are a democracy. I pause to let it sink in. We are a democracy. And you know, regardless of how fragile our democracy is, it must prevail. We have suffered a lot as a country. 1968 to 1985, we had a series of fraudulent elections in this country, rigged elections, you know, and it affected the development of this country. 1992, the return to democracy in Guyana. We must remember that. Democracy returned in 1992 to Guyana. And democracy must be entrenched. It must prevail in Guyana. And both the supporters of the PPPC and the supporters of the APNU AFC must understand that. We cannot go back. We must not go backwards. You know, we must not go back to the days of rigged elections. That is something of the past. The whole system was re-engineered for the 1992 election. And that is the system we use from 1992 to now. And it's difficult to rig. It's difficult to rig an election post-1992. Mr. Lowenfield is on record of saying that in one of the videotapes that was circulated, that it is difficult to impersonate somebody, you know, in order to get there and vote. And all of us voted and we experienced it, you know. And, you know, to come now and have statutory officers who's supposed to be, you know, highly professional, you know, impartial, and they're highly paid too, to deliver the will of the people every 5 years in this country. And you know what? Two of these highly paid officers were caught in the act, involved in the actual rigging or attempts to rig these elections, you know? And the ruling today is important for all Guyanese. The message from the ruling today must be no rigging, free and fair elections. Our elections must all time represent the will of the people. I joined the PPPC in January, and we campaigned throughout this country, as Priya mentioned. We went to the people. The APNU, AFC did the same thing. They went to the people. We explained our plans for the next 5 years to the people. And then we had the election on the 2nd of March. The people voted for the PPPC. And the PPPC must be allowed to assume office in this country peacefully, in keeping with the laws of Guyana, so that Guyana can once again be respected by the wider Caribbean, by the wider Western Hemisphere, and by the world. You know, this has been going on for too long, you know, and now that we have the CCJ ruling, the least our leaders on the other side should be doing is to try and to continue to implant doubt in the minds of their supporters. The time has come for them to let the supporters know that the CCJ has ruled. We must respect the rule of law. And the next step is the declaration by GECOM. And I also want to speak to the security forces, the Guyana Defense Force, the Guyana Police Force. They have an important role to play in upholding the rule of law during this critical time in Guyana. And these forces must not follow any unlawful order. We have a president, and that president will soon be replaced by another president in keeping with the declaration of GECOM. Follow the rule of law, follow lawful orders from the political directorate, only lawful orders. It's important that we maintain peace in this country, and at every step, we observe the rule of law. And I appeal again to the people to behave in a lawful, peaceful manner.
Thank you, Brigadier. Sanjeev, I bring you in here. I want us to start looking at the ruling step by step. One of the most contentious points or arguments in the entire process would have been that of jurisdiction. Jurisdiction at the level of the Court of Appeal and jurisdiction at the level of the Caribbean Court of Justice. The court ruled today that the Court of Appeal stepped outside of its jurisdiction. Put that into perspective in simple language so that Guyanese can understand what exactly this really means.
Yeah, Ed, the easiest starting point is this. The court said that Article 177 meant what it said and said what it meant. So there was no mystery about Article 177. What happened is this. If you wish to have an interpretation relating to the qualification of a president or the constitution after the election of a president, you had the power to invoke Article 177.4 and have the Court of Appeal give you an interpretation. But there are condition precedents. There are things that must exist before the Court of Appeal could have jurisdiction. And that is the election of the president must have taken place, and you must have required something interpreted in the Constitution that related to his qualification. That is it, pure and simple. Now, if you do make an application within the four corners of what Article 177 clearly says, then there is no appeal to the Court of Appeal, from the Court of Appeal's decision, because the Constitution says that any decision made by the Court of Appeal is final. But you have to see what is final. What is final is a very narrow issue. If the court goes outside of that issue, the protection offered to the decision by making it a final decision does not apply. So the Court of Appeal had to determine, before they can determine or interpret the Constitution, the Court of Appeal must first have been satisfied that there was a president elected and the question of interpretation related to his qualification. And it related to an interpretation of the Constitution, not the executive order made by GECOM, not the Representation of the People Act, not the election laws of the country. It must be the interpretation of the Constitution when these things exist. Now, what the Court of Appeal said simply is this. What the CCJ said about the Court of Appeal is this. One, the issue that fell for interpretation before it did not fall within the parameters set out by the Constitution. So it exceeded its jurisdiction. Two, because it exceeded its jurisdiction, the decision it made was a nullity, and they would declare that decision to be a nullity. Three, the insertion of the word valid into the constitutional provision to say valid votes where the interpretation was not really an interpretation of the Constitution. It had to mean valid votes when they said that. And by the Court of Appeal, inserting that word under the guise of saying that it was interpreting the Constitution was not really doing the interpretation of the Constitution and therefore did not enjoy the protection. And it said, crucially, that the mischief or the result of what followed from the orders, everything that follows from the orders would fall. The order is a nullity and everything from it is a nullity. So Lowenfield's report, which he said he prepared by guidance he received from the Court of Appeal, was similarly a nullity. So all the Court of Appeal did on this jurisdiction issue is say this. They said to the Court of Appeal, you were not acting within the power that Article 177 gave to you. You were acting outside of that power. And that is why we have jurisdiction. If you had acted within the power given to you by Article 177, then the CCJ would have no jurisdiction. So it is a fallacy. It is false legal reasoning that is being peddled to the public when they say that the CCJ Act at Section 4.3 says that if there is a provision in your law that says there is no appeal is created to the court, and Article 177 for saying a determination by the Court of Appeal is final. You see, those things are true, but they are only true if you are genuinely interpreting the Constitution within the parameters permitted by Article 177. The court went further. The court said this, all of the complaints that were being made by Mr. Harman about dead voters, migrant voters, and all these numbers that he did, that the Commission and Justice Singh correctly dealt with it and said that it was not an issue to be determined by GECOM because they had neither the legal authority nor the mechanisms to address it. They were not a court. They didn't have a place to take evidence. They had no adjudicators to deal with the matter. So it was a matter that existed entirely within the High Court, pursuant to Article 163 of the Constitution. And all Mr. Harman's complaints should be brought by an election petition in the High Court. So that was also important for the court to say. The court also went on to say that the Chief Elections Officer must present his report in accordance with the directions he received from the chairwoman, retired Justice Claudette Singh, on the 16th of June, 2020. She wrote him, as we recall, to say that he should present his report in accordance with the recount data. The court said that that was the place we were at now, and he had to present his report. He had to present his report in accordance with the directions he had received on 16 June. Now, the court was at pains to point that out because the court will recognize that there have been in Guyana so many shiftings. Everything that is ruled upon by the court, everything that is written in our laws, as long as there was a little bit of wiggle room, that's what APNU did. That's what the coalition did. But the court is very, very clear. Mr. Lowenfield has to present his report. This is not a carte blanche for him. He has no independence to do everything he feels like. He must prepare that report in accordance with the directions of 16 June, which is the recount data. Upon the presentation of that recount data, there would be a declaration of the winner. That's what the court envisaged would take place. So one of the things that we have to recall, yes, that is the quotation. Ed, one of the things that we have to remember that is important is this. When people are saying that how could our court in Guyana not have jurisdiction and the regional court have jurisdiction, the answer is very simple. One, that is not a regional court per se. That is our final court. That is the apex court. The Court of Appeal, the decisions of the Court of Appeal are reviewable on appeal by the higher court. Just like the High Court, the decisions are reviewed by the Court of Appeal. The Court of Appeal in this particular instance got it wrong. They took jurisdiction on a matter that did not fall within Article 177. And therefore, everything that Article 177 have said about there being no appeal to the CCJ, that did not apply because the decision did not fall within the parameters of Article 177, which is a very strict, simple interpretation of the law, which was what our case was. Our case was this court, the Court of Appeal had no jurisdiction because this was not. The court said that the fact that you interpreted a part of the Constitution when you were really interpreting, when Justice Reynolds, and they made reference to that, Justice Reynolds made reference that they must take qualitative and quantitative assessment as provided for in the recount order made by GECOM. That is not the purpose. The purpose was, if indeed they had jurisdiction, to only interpret the Constitution, not the order, not the act, not anything else. Now, when they went beyond that, it meant that they exceeded their jurisdiction, and no decision they made could stand. Your mic, Ed.
Yeah, I'm bringing you in here now, Priya, because
Right.
Sanjeev made the, before you go, Sanjeev made the point about the June 16th order. And maybe we can elaborate a little bit more in your comment, if you can elaborate a little bit more on the contents of that order. While you're making your comments, I'll try to see if I can locate the letter that Justice would have sent to.
So I don't, thanks, Eddie. I'm not going to deal with jurisdiction. The court, the highest court of the land, that is the Caribbean Court of Justice, said that this Court of Appeal did not have jurisdiction to deal with this matter. Sanjeev went into that in detail. But the court also said several things. It said when Justice Claudette Singh said that all these complaints made by Mr. Harmon, his 20-something letters about dead people voting, about migrated people voting, she said that she found some of those were serious and serious enough to receive attention and even an investigation. But she was very clear that neither she as chairperson nor the commission has the jurisdiction, the mandate, the equipment, the wherewithal to inquire into those matters, and that is a matter strictly for the High Court. The Caribbean Court of Justice found today that if it is true that there are queries and anomalies and irregularities both in a particular vote or how a vote was procured, there is a remedy for that, and the remedy for that is for the High Court. So they found very clearly The Caribbean Court of Justice found very clearly today that Justice Claudette Singh, nor Sace Gonraj, nor Robeson Ben, nor Vincent Alexander, nor a collection of them, they can't sit down there and decide which votes must be valid and which votes must not be valid. And certainly, Mr. Lowenfield cannot sit down and decide which votes are valid and which votes are not valid. They specifically said that his report of the 23rd, remember Mr. Lowenfield gave a report on the 23rd that said 115,000 votes would be invalidated. And of the remaining votes, the PNC, AP, and UAFC would get 33 seats in the National Assembly, and the PPPC would get 31 seats, and the joinder parties would get 1 seat. The Caribbean Court of Justice said that report is null and void and of no legal effect, and it must be thrown out. It cannot be used. So they were very clear about that. And they said also that they did not say, I'm taking a little bit of an issue here with what Sanjeev said, that Mr. Lowenfield must go back and do a report. I heard something differently. What they said is GECOM must make must do what it has to do to get a result, to get the recount results declared. So the responsibility is laid at the doorstep of GECOM. And for me, that is important because in that same quote that you had put up earlier, it is important because Mr. Lowenfield is a man and no man or woman is indispensable. So here it is. It is for GECOM to ensure the CEO submits a report in accordance with its direction of June 16th in order to proceed along the path directed by the laws of Guyana. Now, what was the direction of June 16th? The June 16th direction from GECOM was that, listen, we can't decide about valid votes and invalid votes. So you go and count all those votes that are valid and bring back a report to say who got how many seats. And they're saying it is for GECOM to ensure the CEO. They didn't name him. They didn't say Lowenfield. They say it is for GECOM to ensure the CEO. The CEO is a statutory position. So I would go as far as to say it is for GECOM to ensure that the person who is occupying the position of CEO bring back a report in keeping with the laws. And what does the law say? The law says you must count these votes that are valid, that were determined to be valid on election night. You must count them, you must tally them up, you must tabulate them, and you must declare a winner based on that. They also said a very important thing, Eddie, if I could just move on a little bit. They said that valid votes, you don't have to, it's not a fancy thing, it's not a magical thing, it's not something coming out of the sky, we gotta figure out what it is. They said valid votes mean valid votes. And the valid votes are determined on the night of elections. They're divided between votes that the elector cast and then votes that are spoiled and rejected. And on the face of it, once it is valid, it has to be treated as valid. Nobody can't invalidate it. If there are complaints such as the ones that Mr. Harmon made on behalf of his party, those must be investigated in the High Court. After, they went on to say, after a victor has been declared and after the process has been completed. So what did they say today? Let's summarize that. They said the Court of Appeal had no jurisdiction. They said valid votes are votes that are cast and are in the box, determined to be valid in accordance with the laws. They said GECOM, neither the chairperson or the commissioners can decide whether a vote is invalid or whether 115,000 votes are invalid. They said the chief election officer has no ability to determine whether votes are valid or invalid. And his report that says votes are invalid, 115,000 of those, that report is null and void and of no legal effect. that is a nice summary of where we are today. So, and what the court said today. We are now in a place where we have to go forward, and we can discuss how we go forward.
Brigadier, I bring you in here. I know a lot of legal arguments are coming up here. Both you and I are stranger, really, to some extent, to the laws here in terms of the legal arguments, really, because both Sanjeev and Priya might be able to use those legal terms. But before I bring you in, what I gather from all of this, when you spoke about jurisdiction, is that what the appeals court was examining wasn't consistent with what its jurisdiction allows it to do, which is the qualification of a president. And what I understood from the report that GECOM, that Lowenfield is required to prepare, is really based on, and when you look at the letter from June 16th, you will see it is based on the votes cast in the recount. And to emphasize the point that you made, Priya, the fact that at the count, after elections, or at the recount, invalid votes are already removed. And I don't think there is ever a place anywhere in the world, really, that I can point to, where persons are elected, whether a president, whether members of the National Assembly, are elected based on invalid votes. So it is understood that when they say more votes cast, simply means more valid votes cast. You don't need to put that word in. Brigadier. You're muted, Brigadier. I think, yes, go ahead.
Both Priya and Sanjeev explained the matter earlier. And I am confident that the ordinary people like myself is now clearer than we were before. You know, just to reiterate, we had an election on March the 2nd. The votes were counted at the close of poll on March the 2nd. During that process, a number of votes were rejected in keeping with the Representation of the People's Act. And of course, most of the votes were accepted, and therefore they were valid votes. All of these were captured in the statement of poll.
Excuse me there, Brigadier.
Right? Everything was captured in statements of poll. A copy was placed at the place of poll, and every party received their copies of statements of poll. I'm not going to go through everything, but fast forward, we agreed to go to a recount. And at the recount, basically what we did, with 2,339 ballot boxes, we took them out one by one, and we had a team comprising officials from GECOM, the officials from CARICOM, the officials from all the parties that participated in the elections, both the PPPC, the APNU, AFC, and the smaller parties. And they went through 2,339 ballot boxes, and they prepared statements of recount, because they had the statements of poll from polling day, and they recounted everything. So it got to be something else. It can't be statements of poll anymore. It's statements of recount. And you know what? All the statements of poll that we had in our possession, that is the PPPC, when we put it side by side with the statements of recount for the respective ballot boxes, they were similar. Exactly the same or similar. You know, a vote here, one or two votes here and there, you know, because of human error. And I must mention, during the recount process, a number of votes were invalidated and validated. So we had a process at the statement of poll after polling day and at the end of the recount. And that was the process that validated 460,000 votes. 233,000 for the PPPC, 217,000 for the APNU AFC, and the remaining 9,000 thereabout for the smaller parties. What Mr. Lowenfield was required to do is to tabulate and submit his report. That was very clear in the letter that you received, and I think you put it up earlier. Not to go in and try to change up and invalidate. He has no authority to do that. And that's why the court, we were telling him that all the time. We were saying that the smaller parties who participate in the election were saying the same thing. CARICOM officials were saying the same thing. Mainly Ravs Gonzalez, you know, the OAS report, the OAS officials, the Commonwealth group, everybody was telling the APNU, AFC, and GECOM that utilize the results of the recount to declare the elections.
Thanks, Brigadier.
Failed to do that.
And again, let's just point out that the Commonwealth, which represents 54 countries, the Organization of American States, the Caribbean Community, CARICOM, the USA, Canada, Britain, the UK, the EU countries, Norway, France, Barbados, Grenada, all these countries have said there has not been a single country that has spoken on this matter who has not agreed that the recount results must be used to complete this process, which is to make a declaration of a president and a swearing in. Everybody has said that. Everybody has continued to say that. A few days ago, the Secretary of State, Mr. Mike Pompeo, said very clearly that he's instructed his staff at the State Department to hold accountable anybody who's interfering with the democratic conclusion of these elections. So there's nothing stopping us anymore. The CCJ has spoken. They've said that the only thing that the CCJ was never going to say, and we said that from the beginning, whether the PPP won or the PNC won, they were never going to say that. What they have said is that the valid votes were in the box. The valid votes have been tabulated and put on 10 sheets. Nobody, including the chairperson or the commission, nor the chief election officer, could invalidate any of those votes. And that what is left to be done to conclude this process in a peaceful way, I think they used words like that, is for the CEO to follow the instruction of the GECOM chairperson of her letter of the 16th, which I saw you had on the screen earlier, which instructs him to tabulate those votes in accordance with the laws of the country, which essentially means count up how people vote and declare her finally the president of the country.
Exactly.
That's essentially what's left to be done.
And you know, if I should come back in there, the APNU, AFC, the incumbent, I mean, they're still in government. They're operating like if the whole world is against Guyana, but the whole world is not against Guyana. Let's make it clear, the whole world is against what the APNU, AFC is doing. They're holding on to power. They're holding on to political office after they would have lost the elections. And Guyana is a democracy. So how can you do that in a democracy? They want us to lose our status as a democracy. This is a government that is on record of saying that they've brought back respect for Guyana. among the international community. They said that. They said the world lost respect for us. And they get into office, and as they start to run this country, they start to govern, they've returned respect for the people of Guyana and the international community. And in one fell swoop, by just refusing to demit office after losing an election, the whole world is looking at Guyana now. Not in a respectful manner, but out of concern. The questions are asked, is this country still a democracy? But the question is not asked of Guyana. The question is asked of the APNU AFC government. Do you still believe in democracy? And the answer is, if they say yes, it means that they must leave office now. You know, Mr. Harmon, after the CCJ ruling, if you listen to Mr. Harmon's statement, most recent statement, I don't know if you have it, Ed, where you could put it up for the people to see, but Mr. Harmon is not sounding like someone who intends to concede and to leave office. They still want to hold on to power. So the earliest that GECOM can meet, my understanding is that GECOM is meeting 1:30 tomorrow. The earliest opportunity GECOM can meet and declare the rightful winners of this election, the PPPC, and have Dr. Mohammed Irfan Ali sworn in as president. The shortest time GECOM can do that is the better for this country, because the APNU AFC appears as though they want to continue to hold on to power. They want to continue to
There's a statement, Brigadier, that
lie to
Mr. Harmon made. And if I can quickly read it so that the viewers can, those who maybe can't recognize the words. He says that the end of this matter is in the Caribbean Court of Justice, puts the matter back to GECOM for the final decisions to be made in the declaration and the swearing in of our president. I agree with him completely on that part. Dr. Irfan Ali is going to be the president for all of us. So I agree.
But I hope he means that.
That's the only thing I can decipher from that. I hope, and I don't think he can even be referring to Mr. Granger. He went on to say, as we have said all along, our constitution made provision for the actions taken by the chief elections officer. We expect that GECOM, in its understanding of the court's ruling, will stand firmly with the constitution, which is our supreme law. Mr. Harmon says a lot of nothing here.
Exactly.
In my
That's
view,
worrisome.
Back, because we dealt with the first part, the only president that he can be referring to is Dr. Irfan Ali. And indeed, the Constitution made provision for the chief elections officer, but not the actions that he would have taken. So I think he got that wrong.
Mr. Harmon is saying our president. This is Harmon saying our president, and that is worrisome. We need to appeal to the people that we have to follow the rule of law, and we have to be peaceful and allow GECOM to do their work in keeping with what was outlined in the CCJ ruling today, and not listen to these messages, these coded messages, you know, because we have a set of people who will listen to their leaders, and yes, some of them may be confused, but then they go and do a lot of unlawful things. And we have to appeal to the supporters of the APNU AFC to continue to operate within the confines of the law, be peaceful. This is not a time for violence. We have another step to go. We have the declaration coming, and there will be a new government. And based on all the information we have, the statements and recounts will be followed, and that government will be formed by the PPPC with Dr. Irfan Ali as the president. And this is the message that we have to communicate to all Guyanese. Let us process and let us accept the results of the process, not to listen to these coded messages by the leaders.
Yeah,
Frankly, yeah,
Ed,
go
in
ahead. Priya,
relation
why
to
don't I
what
bring
you
you in
put
here?
up,
But
in
before you
relation to
comment,
this,
Sanjeev, before you comment, I know you're going to respond to what Harman said. I want to put that, maybe assist in putting your response in a particular context. So Harman, based on his comments, I want to bring this in here. And this is what Justice Saunders said. It was inconsistent with the constitutional framework for the CEO or GECOM to disenfranchise tens of thousands of electors in a seemingly non-transparent and arbitrary manner without the due processes established in Article 163 and the Validation Act, the Elections Petition. I will jump quickly to Article 163, which says, subject to the provision of this article, the High Court shall have exclusive jurisdiction to determine any question, A, regarding the qualification of any person to be elected as a member of the National Assembly, and B, whether either generally or in any particular place an election has been lawfully conducted or the results thereof has been or may have been affected by any unlawful act or omission. I bring you in now. I put those two out there for you.
well, Ed, you see, just before the line that you put in the quotation from the president of the court, Justice Saunders, what he said was, and this is where what Harman is saying and what a lot of the APNU, the James Bond and Mayor Robertson are saying, that it is for GECOM and it is now, they must respect the Constitution, and they're implying that the CEO has a power and a right to do things, and that valid votes is what President Granger has said, that he will make sure that there's only valid votes. But a few lines above the statement that you just did from Saunders, from Justice Saunders, he said this: by the unnecessary insertion of the word valid, the Court of Appeal impliedly invited the CEO to engage unilaterally in a further and unlawful validation exercise unknown to and in clear tension with the existing constitutionally anchored electoral laws. That further exercise, which the CEO was quick to embrace in breach of the Court of Appeal stay of proceedings order, also had the effect of facilitating a serious trespass on the exclusive jurisdiction of the High Court established by Article 163. The idea that the CEO or GECOM could, in an unaccountable and transparent and seemingly arbitrary manner, without due process and the legal standards established by Article 163, disenfranchise scores of thousands of electors, is entirely inconsistent with the constitutional framework. And that part of the judgment, please, Ed, puts to rest all of the things that are being peddled by the James Bonds of the world, by the Joe Harmons of the world, even by President Granger in his speech today about they have been, all of these things have occurred and they will make sure that only valid votes are counted. The issue of validation, as Priya rightly said, has been determined. And Justice Saunders was at pains to say it has already been determined, and no public officer, except for a court, can now change that. So what they made very clear is that the process, once those determinations were made on the count, it is now a tabulation. You have to now put together all of the votes, come up with your numbers so that you can calculate the number of seats in Parliament. What he said in his judgment was unusually stark and bare and direct as to what happened. He said that firstly, he said there was no need to interpret Article 177, and putting the word valid in added nothing. But what it did is it gave the chief elections officer the view that he had some power, which he didn't have, but he executed his duties as if he had those powers, and he gave himself them by saying, this is what the guidance of the Court of Appeal was. And by that, in a non-transparent manner, which the court recognized, he simply removed 115,000 votes. Now, bear in mind this, there were 5 judges in the court. Ed, the decision was unanimous. All 5 agreed with it. There was one decision written. Now, usually what happens from time to time, Ed, is you have 5 courts, the various judges would write. It would still be all in agreement, but you would have several opinions about it. The court was careful, I believe, respectfully, what they were trying to do is not have anything that gave room to do anything other than what they wanted. So it was clear that the 5 were in agreement, and they wrote one judgment, and they all agreed that this is the judgment of the court. And the reason, one of the things we have to be very careful about of what is being peddled. It is true that everything that is being said by the lawyers such as Harmon and Mayo Robertson, etc., that it is now for GECOM to take things forward to the declaration, that is true. But the undertone inference that is being made, that somehow there is still a play to be made, and there is still an independence in Lowenfield, that he could fight and say, do this or do that. That does not exist. And the court was very clear why it didn't exist. All of the complaints, they agreed 100% with what Claudette Singh, as the chairman, had said. She said all of these complaints are worthy of investigation, but not by GECOM, by the court at an election petition. There was nothing that could now be done. Now, if you don't want to accept that, Ed, all you will be doing is going in a circle, and then GECOM must take steps. If Lowenfield wouldn't act, GECOM is not powerless. They can suspend, they can appoint a different officer. There are mechanisms that are specifically provided for. But one would hope that a public officer who is discharging his public functions would do so now that he has clear directions, that when it says on his sole advice, he's not giving advice on how to fly a plane or drive a car. He is simply totaling the numbers. That's his only job. He mistake, and in fact, APNU represented that the fact that the Constitution said it was on his advice meant it was a carte blanche for him to do what he wants. Well, no, all he could do is total those numbers. That's all. And he can't discard votes, and he can't add votes. He has to take the recount numbers. That's the direction of the commission. He has said repeatedly, you have showed those videos on previous programs where he has said that he has to take an instruction from the commission. Well, he has one now, and he should carry it out.
And I just want to be very clear, Eddie. Sanjeev said the 5 judges said what they said because they wanted to be careful that they don't give any wiggle room. That may be so. But my interpretation is the 5 judges said that because anybody in their right mind would say the same thing. It's only one set of people, not even all the AP and UAFC supporters. It's a small set of people who are bent on rigging the elections and taking numbers and giving it to the AP and UAFC, who are insisting that Mr. Lowenfield or Mr. Mingo could add numbers as they feel like. Nobody else who sits down to even look at this would consider that anybody has that kind of power. This is what the court said. Remember, Eddie, we talk about political parties and the PPP won or the APNU lost. An election is essentially about giving people, ordinary people, the market vendor, the farmer, the cane cutter, the lawyer, the accountant, the busman, the people who ride the bus, the conductor, giving ordinary people a voice in how their country must be governed and how their lives could be governed. And this is what the Justice Saunders opened the court's judgment this afternoon by saying this: the election of the president and members of the National Assembly of Guyana are matters of fundamental importance. It is of considerable concern to the people of Guyana that, although general and regional elections were held as long as the 2nd of March 2020, to date, the results of the elections have not been declared and the president and members of the National Assembly have not been appointed. The Constitution professes the Cooperative Republic of Guyana to be a democratic sovereign state, and elections that are free, fair, transparent, and accountable are the lifeblood of a true democracy. In other words, Eddie, what we're doing here, this whole process, is one set of people, good people in Guyana, including APNU AFC supporters, because you have the Dominic Gaskins and the Priya Singhs and the Justice for All, CN Sharma, good people in Guyana and good people across the world fighting for the lifeblood of Guyana to stay flowing and flowing healthily, for Guyana to be a democratic place. And the court did not leave any doubts about whether Mr. Lowenfield or Miss Roxanne Myers, if she's in his, if he's supposed to be, if he's fired or if he resigns, or if Champawati Prasad goes into her place. No CEO has the power to throw away. They found it offensive that you could just throw away and invalidate votes, votes that the people of Guyana gave and spoke with at the national and regional elections. And so it is very important when Mr. Harman and Mr. Granger emerged today, because you know he hides under some hole. He emerged today outside of State House and he gave some kind of his usual, oh, we'll follow the law, but it's back at GECOM, and you know there was all this fraud and we have to make sure fraudulent votes are not in these elections. And we have Mr. Harman saying here that it's back to GECOM and GECOM is going to have to follow the law. And there, look at here it is, Granger saying that we will continue to fight to make sure votes are counted. Well, the Caribbean Court of Justice said how votes are to be counted and which votes are to be counted. And specifically,
but Priya, if I can interject, and you look at what Granger is saying here, he's saying, and he's, because the CCJ didn't issue any, what you call it, not necessarily coercive orders, the orders that we usually ask for, consequential orders. He's saying that CCG has made no coercive orders. That means that they have not given any instruction what GECOM is empowered under the law to do. I don't think they needed to give instructions as to what GECOM is empowered under the law to do. GECOM, Justice started saying, I suspect, know what the law says.
No, but I disagree with him. They didn't say GECOM must go and declare the PPPC as the winners, but they specifically said what GECOM cannot do. They said that GECOM cannot invalidate votes. They said that the only votes GECOM must count and declare these elections on are the valid votes that have already been tabulated in the recount process and given on these 10 certificates of recount. So they didn't say, Granger, come out of the place, get out of the office, exit State House, leave they didn't give those kinds of coercive orders, but they specifically said that you cannot invalidate votes based on Mr. Lowenfield's view, based on letters from Mr. Harman. They said very clearly, Claudette Singh is right. She has no ability, no jurisdiction to examine those votes. So they were very, very clear about what can happen and what cannot happen. They're not the kind of people, they didn't have the question before them about who won the election and who lost the election. So they couldn't answer that question. But in their judgment, they were very clear, in my view, clearer than I would have expected, because, you know, courts are sometimes, they dance a little bit in terms of being I think they try to be diplomatic, but I don't think there was much diplomacy in this judgment at all. It was very clear, very, very clear about what can and cannot happen.
I just want to raise this one other point on what Mr. Granger said. And I see he tried to sneak the issue of, he says here, as far as we're concerned, we have evidence that there has been massive fraud and irregularities. Fair enough. AP and UFC thinks there were irregularities, there was fraud. Fair enough. Nobody is telling you not to think that. But what Mr. Granger is not saying is that the court made it quite simple as to how you address those irregularities and those allegations of fraud. So to say to your support, I think it's, again, trying to fool their supporters. And the sad thing about these kinds of actions is that this can lead to serious problems, because I'm saying that, okay, you have these concerns, but the court did say that you can only vent or try to get a resolution to these concerns by way of an election petition, and you can only do that after a declaration is made. I'm going to bring in you here, Brigadier. This position being taken by Granger, it is something that we've seen maybe over the last 2 weeks or so, even more prominent, where they try to skew words, to twist things, to suit their own agenda, and to give their supporters false hope.
But Ed, that's the same point I was making in relation to Harmon's statement. It's getting clearer now with the statement by Granger, and it ended by giving a commitment that they will ensure that all their votes are counted. If you put it up back, you can see he ended by not only talking about anomalies and irregularities, but also saying that they will ensure that all the votes are counted. But the point is, the votes are already counted and validated. Why are you at this 11th and a half hour when GECOM is likely to make a declaration maybe in a couple of days from now, if so long, mentioning but votes counted? The votes are already counted and recounted, and we have the number of valid votes, and we know where it will go. GECOM will use the results of the recount, and the PPPC will form the next government. Why are you telling supporters you will ensure that their votes are counted? The votes are already counted. Message that you're sending to your supporters that will leave them confused. And we want to appeal to these same supporters that the votes are already counted. We've been following the legal process so far. We'll continue to follow and observe the law to the end of this process. GECOM has to make a declaration on votes that are already counted and are valid.
What we will do as we go along, Sanjeev, Brigadier, and Priya, is that we will also look at some of the questions in the minds of our viewers, especially those on Facebook, and we'll seek to answer them, short answers as possible, so that we can get in as much questions as possible. I want to start with the very first one here, that is for Sanjeev. And Padma Singh is asking, I have a question, Mr. Datadin. Does any one man have a right or power to decide or validate votes? Also, at what point in an election can votes be validated? I think the first part we have answered already, but
yeah, the process actually is very simple, Ed. Under normal circumstances, the presiding officer at the place of poll decides by looking at the ballots, this one's what party, this one, and they could only invalidate votes under the statute for very specific things. If it is not a ballot paper from GECOM, meaning it doesn't have the security features, if it is marked where you cannot discern the intention of the voter, or if they have put their name or write something, or they have marked it for several parties at the same time, so it becomes a spoiled ballot. The act is very clear that those are the only ways that you can invalidate votes. No other ways are possible. Now, that person who is there is the presiding officer, and all the party scrutineers that are there to participate in that process. Now, that was what would happen on election night. In the current situation that happened in Guyana, we have one step further. We had a recount. At the recount, which was conducted by at the 12 recount stations with the supervisors there, they did the same thing. They opened the ballot boxes, they looked at the vote, they determined that this was a ballot from GECOM with the security features, and they decided that the intention of the voter was clear. So they counted them. Now, once that process is finished, only a judge can alter it. Nobody else has a say. The Constitution is very clear about that. The exclusive jurisdiction lies with the court. Now, when you look at the legislation, the process is a great indicator as to why only a judge could do it. You have to have very clearly a couple of things happen. You got to have a petition filed. You have to show certain specific evidence. You have to show proof of what you're alleging, and you have to be able to have that proof amount to such that the court, when they look at it, will come to the conclusion on a criminal standard that you are right in what you're saying, which is beyond reasonable doubt. So that process has to take place. Now, when that is done, when you are presenting your case to say what your point is, the other side, like all the political parties, are entitled to be represented. All the persons with an interest are allowed to be represented. And in fact, that's what the chairman, Claudette Singh, was referring. There is no such process or mechanism that GECOM can engage in. So the answer is, it's done under normal circumstances by the presiding officer on election night. In the current situation in Guyana, it was done at the recount stations by the supervisors at the recount stations. Once that decision is made, that's it. Lowenfield can have the world of complaints and he can have everything. He has no power now to do anything about that. The next and the only other time, once that decision is made, has to go to a judge in a court in accordance with the legislation. You have to present a certain minimum evidence is required.
What I want to go back a little and to speak generally, I'll bring you in here, Brigadier. What we recognize now, Priya, Sanjeev, and Brigadier, is that it's another attempt at maybe shifting the goalpost and clutching at another straw. So you've had many of these occasions as we move along. You've had the elections were free and fair. They started with that. When the bingo attempted fraud, when those were exposed, and the recount came. Prior to the recount, they claimed that there was no need for recount because the votes were valid, the elections were free and fair. When the recount started, you had them shifting to say there were fraudulent activities. You know, the election is not credible. Then when Lowenfield attempted to give them 2/3 majority, they start singing victory again. Then they switched from that, they went back to the elections were fraudulent. Then the most recent report by Lowenfield, they claimed victory again. Matter of fact, they were sharing that out and so forth. Now, having been unsuccessful in getting the CCJ to agree with the Court of Appeal, which went outside of its jurisdiction, they are now going back to talk about fraudulent irregularities and fraud. But my question to you, Brigadier, in all that I said there, to what end? Because the CCJ was very clear in its position. To what end are they now trying to throw something else into the works, hoping that it will stick somewhere and there is a chance of them, being declared?
Well, Ed, I cannot read the minds of the APNU AFC leadership, but certainly I will appeal for them to do the decent thing, because this is a coalition that campaigned on decency, that campaigned on honesty, and campaigned on integrity, you know? And now is the time for them to display to the Guyanese people that indeed they are decent, you know? And what they should do is tell the Guyanese people that we will continue to uphold the rule of law. We respect the ruling of the CCJ, and we await the outcome of GECOM's declaration. Full stop.
Before you go on, just a little correction. I don't think, sorry to interrupt you there, but I don't think the APNUFC can come to the Guyanese people and say to them that we are going to continue to uphold the rule of law. Maybe, to be accurate, they may say we can start upholding the rule of law, because we can go right back to 2018 December. They have not done that ever since then, and even before.
Ed, we're talking about CCJ ruling and declaration. we can do a whole hour and a half about what happened before then. I agree with you. But now is the time for them to come clean, to be decent and honest to the people. And tell the people, yes, we're waiting on the declaration, right? Which will come in a matter of days or hours. But they should also tell the people that they have lost these elections. And when the people hear that coming from their leaders, that has a calming effect. Because in a democracy, when you go to elections, there will be winners and there will be losers. They should remind the people that in 2015, they were the winners. The PPP lost in 2015. And if you could go back and see all the video clips from all the principal positions that they took in 2015, before and after the 2015 elections, this is a set of people who cast aside all those, you know, high and high morals that they held to, and now is telling us a number of things that are leaving their supporters confused. The time has come, as I said before, perhaps what Mr. Granger can do. Mr. Granger has a history of saying one thing and doing something else. You know, he said that they're gonna wait the declaration, but perhaps he could operate true to form. Having told the people, his supporters, that we will wait the declaration, he could quietly tonight pick up the phone and call Dr. Irfan Ali and concede. So by tomorrow morning, everybody will know that Mr. Granger operated true to norm. He said one thing and he did something different. He conceded. You know, that's what he needs to do now. To concede and remain with some decency.
It's sad that this man who heads the list, who is the president, who is the leader of the APNU AFC, like you suggested, would have to tell his supporters and tell the others in his party that, look, we're not conceding, and he has to speak like a thief in the dark to call Dr. Irfan to say, I'm conceding. It is sad. And that's a real problem actually in the coalition. But I want to ask all three.
There's a question that
Go ahead, Priya. And then I'll...
There's a question that someone raised, I think twice. Onik Prasad is suggesting that someone else, I think she's named Timothy, but might have suggested that the PPPC is unable to protest or unable to take our fight to the streets or unable to represent our supporters. Let me say this, and let me say it very clearly. The PPPC has been very responsible, very, very responsible, because if you know what the supporters of the People's Progressive Party wanted to do when they found out that there were attempts, real attempts to rig the election, the PPP had to be responsible. Let me say without any hesitation that the PPPC is going nowhere. We are going nowhere. We have taken this fight not from yesterday or from March the 3rd. From the day we lost the election, and I put loss in air quotes because now that Lowenfield and Mingo and all these people are involved, I'm not sure if we lost. But from the moment in 2015 that we exited office, we went to every bottom house, to every village, to supporters. We represented every cause. We ran this country from the benches of the opposition, and we are going nowhere. In every single,
going into government, that's the only place we're going.
We're going into government for every single stage from March 2nd to now. Every time Mr. Granger got dressed, and he did 4 times to go and get sworn in, he was thwarted by the efforts of the PPPC, and that was not knee-jerk. That was strategic. It was calculated. It was responsible. It was brilliant, and it came with brilliant leadership from the general secretary of the party, who was ably supported by his leaders and members and supporters. I would not, though, discount the effort of the new and smaller parties, because for me, their effort has been perhaps more than the bigger parties simply because they have less resources. So I want to make it very clear, Onik, that we are going nowhere. We are going nowhere until the will of the people of this country is given effect to. And that will mean that we are going nowhere until and into government with Mr. Irfan Ali as our president. So just be very, very clear about that. While you might not see us burning Regent Street, you have seen us in the courts. You have seen us engaging our international partners and allies. And you have seen that the world stands right now with the position of the People's Progressive Party, that every vote must count and the will of the people must be given effect to. So that is where the PPP stands on this issue.
All right, I wanted to ask, because we have a few minutes remaining, maybe about 7 minutes or so. I want to ask individually for you to tell us, where do we go from here? We've completed the process of the Carbon Court of Justice. Where do we go from here? Just to reiterate so that the Guyanese people understand our way of what we will be expecting moving forward. I'll start with you, Sanjeev.
This election that is going on for so long, we are, as I like to say, the long time's done, short time's left. We are now at the position where GECOM has to make a declaration, and following that declaration, we all know what the numbers are. We all know that Dr. Irfan Ali is the next president, and we all know that what will have to take place following that is a swearing in. That's what we need to take place in Guyana to close this chapter. Now, it is a process, yes, but this is no longer a lengthy process of what is required. Everybody in Guyana know exactly what were the numbers of the recount. Everybody knows that Justice Claudette Singh, as chairman, she wrote to Lowenfield by a letter dated 16 June, saying, please present your figures in accordance with the recount data. That's not disputed. The GECOM now has to do their job and do it with some level of, they have to engage the process in a more aggressive and a more forceful manner so that we could get to the end of this process. Now, whatever it is that APNU believes they have proof of about migrant voters, about dead voters, whatever they have to do, they can have their say. They can have their say in a court of law once the election process is done, once Dr. Ali is sworn in, and they can go to a judge and present their proof. We might see those statement of polls that they've been saying that they're keeping for strategic reasons, but I am betting you, I have a bet with you, Ed. We are never, ever going to see that. Those statement of polls will never see the light. And there's a reason for it. So when they keep trying, it is disappointing that leadership in this country, they were in the government. And it is disappointing that all of this that has gone on, they are trying now to indicate to their supporters that someone can do something else. Do you notice that there is no conversation being made that they have won on the votes? It is, as Ramjatan was saying, maybe they can hold on a technicality. Well, there is no technicality left now. The CCJ was very clear in what it ruled. It said that it was, and I could go through the order. The decision of the Court of Appeal is made without jurisdiction, is invalid and of no legal effect, which means even Lowenfield's report. And they say the court declares that the report of Lowenfield on 23rd June is similarly of no legal effect. So he received instructions. GECOM now has to say to receive what is the recount data. If Lowenfield wouldn't do it, GECOM is not powerless. They can appoint someone else. They can remove him, they can suspend him. As we have discussed before, he is not a constitutional officer. It is one function that he performs that is put in the Constitution. He's a statutory officer. And if the deputy wouldn't do it because there is so much concern about Ms. Myers and there is so much, I wouldn't say complaints, but so much is known of what was taking place. And if she wouldn't do it, then GECOM is not powerless. The law says GECOM can direct any officer to do that which it wishes to be done. So GECOM is fully within its power. I do hope that what GECOM does is move these last two stages. The big issues are always the count. Settle the count, get the count done, get it done transparently. That has been done painfully transparent. Now that we know it, I would trust that what GECOM will do tomorrow when they meet is move forward. Move forward with the alacrity that the situation deserves. Guyana is in the middle of a pandemic. Guyana has other problems we need to deal with. We need a government in place. We need Dr. Ali to be in place so he can establish his government. And of course, Brigadier could bring the leadership that we know he will bring as well as our Prime Minister.
And we need an opposition. We need an opposition in place because
I'm not sure we need the current person involved. I don't think they should be involved in public life at all. What they have done are unspeakable things.
Well, it doesn't
never be involved in public
life. But the fact of the matter is, Sanjeev, they have received 217,000 votes. And they have to form the opposition.
They need to form, Ed, my personal view is, and I will say this, I believe they need to have better leaders. I believe persons who have manipulated the Chronicle newspapers and written nonsense, attacked the government by putting, and the Caribbean Court of Justice, and everybody who would speak to shout them down in a rabid market way. Those persons are using taxpayers' monies and are paid for it, should never receive funds from the public coffers ever again. Ever.
Priya, continue.
For me, democracy is hard. It's never going to be easy. And if the people of the supporters of the APNU choose Mr. Granger as their leader, then that is what we will have to live with, because that is democracy. I wouldn't choose him. I wouldn't choose any of that bunch right now, except for a few who have remained quiet or have actually spoken up. I believe the PNC needs to do some introspection and get new leaders, a new leadership. They are a party that represents a large number of persons, and they have members, and their members have concerns. Now, for me, the PPP does not need and never did need representation from another party to govern fairly and equitably. That is how we govern. But I'm saying that there are people who are going to need explanations. I saw people outside State House this afternoon who sought to hear from their president, and who could have listened to him saying, my fellow Guyanese, my supporters, the CCJ has ruled. We have done all we could do. These elections are lost, but the PNC is not lost. We will be back stronger in 2025. We did that in 2015. In 2015, as we ourselves recovered, and let's be frank, as we ourselves as individuals recovered from shock, we went out to our supporters and we spoke to them and we gave leadership and we explained how we could be effective in the governance, both executive as well as legislative governance of this country. And we led and we dealt with that loss. And it is an emotional thing also, because people have strong feelings about elections. So we dealt with that as strong, mature, responsible leaders. And there has to be place for mature, responsible leadership in the PNC, APNU, AFC. I believe personally the AFC is dead. I believe they're over. I believe the newer parties have good ground to gain support, but that is a matter for them. For me, at this stage where we are, is that these elections are not completed. They're not finished. And we have exhausted the various courts, the High Court, the Full Court, the Court of Appeal, the CCJ, and the various international bodies that we could have appealed to and gone to as a country. And everybody has spoken in one voice. The people of Guyana went out to the polls on March 2nd. They voted. Their vote must count. That vote is recorded in the recount figures of the that are in the certificates of recount. Those recount figures must be given effect to, and the PPPC must be sworn in. There must be an end to these elections. I am very confident. I am very confident that the People's Justice Claudette Singh, who has already said publicly as well as in sworn affidavits what she believes her role is, and she has said very clearly her role is to give effect to the people of the way the people voted, and that she does not have the ability to change that in any way. And so I expect at 1:30 tomorrow, we're going to see that kind of decision. And hopefully before the end of this week, we're at Wednesday already, we will have a President finale and Prime Minister Mark Phillips.
Thanks, Priya. Brigadier, your closing comments.
Well, you know, Ed, I agree with both Sanjeev and Priya. The fastest time we can have a declaration that will bring things to an end. A declaration now is symbolic in the sense that it's telling the people that the political instability that we have endured for the past 4 months is finally over. And the will of the people is respected. So I want to appeal to the Guyanese people. In fact, first I want to thank the Guyanese people for being peaceful in a general sense and observing the rule of law for this entire period of political instability. And accept the CCJ ruling today and await the declaration and accept the declaration. The declaration will result in a new government. We know that already. The government will be led by Dr. Irfan Ali. And it will be a government for all Guyanese. We've already communicated that to the Guyanese people, that we want to be a government for all Guyanese. And we want all Guyanese to join us in our government, in making Guyana a better place for all of us. And it is our hope that, notwithstanding what happened over the last 4 months with regards to the APNU AFC, we want them to take their rightful place and become a formidable opposition. Because if we're going to govern in the interest of the people and be effective in Guyana, we need an opposition in the House of Assembly. We were a good opposition over the last 5 years, and we look forward to the APNU AFC being a good opposition as we lead, as we govern Guyana for the next 5 years. Democracy must prevail in Guyana. We have the resources now to make Guyana a better place, and we have to work together as a people. Now is our opportunity to shine. After the declaration, the formation of the new government, and the APNU AFC being a responsible opposition. That is what Guyana needs now.
Thank you very much, Brigadier Phillips, Prime Minister-elect Sanjeev Datadin, and Priya Manickchand for joining me this evening in this marathon discussion. We've gone for almost 2 hours. And to our viewers, we want to say thanks for being part of the program. Of course, we're going to continue to keep you updated. I don't think this is over as yet. Of course, GECOM meets tomorrow, and we expect some movement forward with GECOM. Maybe the guys are thinking about something else they can pull out of the hat tomorrow. We can't put that past them. The fact of the matter is, this is going to end very soon, and it's going to end one way, where GECOM, as is mandated by law, will use the correct figures that are required. Those are the figures from the recount to declare the winners of the elections. And we all know the winners, the People's Progressive Party Civic, which gained the most votes. The APNUFC is second in line, but they are behind by 15,416 votes. So again, to my panel, I want to say thanks for joining me. And of course, to our viewers, I want to say thank you so much for being part of the program. Have a good rest of the evening. Bye for now.
Good night,
Thank
Ed.
you, Ed.
Good night, Priya. Good night, Brigadier.
Good night, Priya. Good night, Sanjeev. Good night to our viewers.